I am so honored this morning to introduce to you Catherine Fay Green. She is a writer and public relations specialist living in Western Massachusetts. She was the arts director at the award-winning Nantucket Enquirer and Mirror. She's held several other positions with outstanding success. Congratulations for having your article published in Authority magazine titled Strategies for Rebuilding Life After Trauma. Would you begin by sharing a bit about your childhood?
Um, it was challenging. I was an only child. I grew up in southern New Hampshire. My father was an airline pilot and he was away for a lot of the week, and my mother was a city suburban girl, and she was living in it was very rural, and she was alone a lot of the time, and she was lonely, and so she ended up having an affair, and she was an alcoholic. She became a very serious alcoholic. So that was hard when my dad was traveling, and she would leave me at the bus stop and have a lot of really scary outbursts. And I never really knew which version of mom I was getting from day to day. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not unusual. Um,
I understand that's typical
yeah.
when you have a parent who's an alcoholic. You're never sure which parent is going to show up on any given day. I'm sorry that was kind of a rough start in life, and yet you were very successful in your career as a young.
I was solid. I really enjoyed my journalism career. Yes.
That's
And it takes you places, which is fun.
As a young adult, you were working, was it in the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico? Where was it you were working?
I was a reporter at the Virgin Islands Daily News and then the St. Croix Avis. So they're both daily newspapers serving. The Daily News is a territory-wide paper, and the St. Croix Avis is more specific to St. Croix.
And what was life like for you as a young adult in a job you loved and in a place that was kind of exotic?
It was really fun. I met a really great group of people. They were all a couple of them were Crusians born on St. Croix, and everybody had they were there for some career move, whether it was working for the agriculture department. There's a lot of initiatives stateside. They call it partner initiatives with various government agencies in the Virgin Islands. And I met some good friends reporting and got to see a lot of the Caribbean and had a great time until I didn't.
You didn't.
Yeah, yeah.
What we know as 9/11 happened a few weeks before your particular terrorist attack. There's no easy way to say that you were raped. What were the days and weeks afterward like for you?
Well, so 9/11 happened. It was 16 weeks to the day prior to what happened to me, and it was really uncanny because both Tuesday mornings were very bright and sunny, and the timing was really similar for both events. It was sort of like, just a really sudden, shocking event coming out of nowhere. I mean, of course, being raped was uh, personally much more shocking to me, but um, it was just it's utterly life changing. There's nothing, you know, it's just hard to talk about how the that arrestive fight or flight really impacts you when you imagine a small animal being trapped. That's what it feels like, that you are trapped and you are going to die, and you're positive with a gun to your head that you are going to die.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and and interestingly, uh you just lose control. You go into a state of I don't know, like subconsciousness maybe.
Mhm.
And you just go limp and do what you can to survive. To not provoke your attacker. So yeah.
Because the object in those moments is to survive and not be killed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, it's one of those huge things that forever after your life is divided by that event, like before the event,
Yeah.
after the
Yeah. Yes.
I'm were the rapists caught and punished?
Um, they took my vehicle, and I was fortunate that a woman I worked with was married to a man who worked in the housing authority, and he recognized the vehicle being driven into a nearby housing community kind of at top speed, and they'd stolen. I didn't have many valuables then. I just had some jewelry from my grandmother, and really that was it. And they took that. And my friend's husband, um, he uh, he put out a call, an APB, I guess, an all points bulletin to area police. And I had probably simultaneously had, gotten to the phone and called 911. So the men were identified, but then they were intentionally misidentified to police to protect them. So it did take a long time for them to be accurately identified. And that kind of happened after the rape kit evidence was processed and didn't match the people who were initially identified as having exited the car. And when they were able to use the DNA evidence, and match that with somebody they already had on file who had been accused of other crimes, they found my primary rapist. I was raped by two men in different ways. So yeah, and that he ended up plea bargaining. That this happened in January, and it wasn't until a year later in March. So I had thought I was going to, and a lot of women in my position don't have the opportunity to even go to trial. And so I did have that opportunity, but it was just a sentencing. It was a victim's impact statement that I prepared to read in court. But it happened, there's a school group touring the courthouse that day, and I don't know why they brought them to a rape sentencing,
Gosh,
but they did. So I didn't read my statement, right? I just read a really abbreviated, but backing up, yes, I was, if you can call the aftermath of something like that, there's not many silver linings. And I definitely dug myself into an even deeper hole with some substance abuse issues that I self anesthetized, and that's never a good strategy. um, so yeah, it was a really hard thing to experience, and you don't come back easily from something like that.
it's not something you can just bounce back from. So you have to, I can only imagine how hard you have to work to try to piece together a somewhat normal life afterwards.
Um, what's hard is when people in your community know what's happened to you. Each time you see them, when you go back out to start living your life again, it's as though you're presenting as an entirely different person. And everybody, and understandably, everybody feels the need to come up and tell you that they're sorry, and they want to express themselves, and that. So it's kind of, you have to re-navigate, except with your very close friends, re-navigate your relationship with a lot of people in your community. And that's something that might be a reason why a lot of women don't talk about sexual assault, sexual abuse, because it really redefines you in the eyes of other people. And it's kind of an just, for lack of a better word, an icky feeling, to
Yeah.
imagine what other people are imagining about you
Yeah.
with their public knowledge of what happened to you. And that can just compound the shame.
I've, you know, I'm grateful this hasn't ever happened to me, but I've read a lot, heard a lot about the actual physical act you can recover from, but it's the shame later. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, completely. Yeah. And, rape and sexual assault, sexual violence are unique
Hmm.
in that way. It's a personal disaster. But it's not something you can just walk back into society and say, my home was flooded in a hurricane, or, I have um, an illness, a serious illness. It's just it's hard to network your
Yeah.
grief and the trauma. Um, and so, yeah.
I think as a culture, we're not taught or we don't know how to respond with empathy to someone going through a tragedy like you went through. People don't know what to say. They don't know whether to ignore it, or if they say something, then it's almost like you have to relive it as you respond to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned in your article that you just kind of, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it was 2 years later when you were given an offer from your former job. And
Mhm.
it sounds like it was such a relief to leave the scene of the crime, so to speak. Is that true?
It was a huge relief. Unfortunately, there is crime in this part of the Caribbean, and there are a lot of armed robberies and worse, a lot of domestic violence, and a lot of guns on the street.
Well,
So even just, something like going out to dinner, I'd find myself looking over my shoulder, and it was a palpable sense of relief to leave that island and I find myself back on another island actually. So, but and just feel, I just remember walking around in the evenings, and it was June, and so the light lasted a long time into the evening, and I'd take my dog for long, long, long walks, um, past all the beautiful rose-covered cottages in Nantucket, and I was just really, really fortunate to have a job and to have a sense of safety finally. But I had left a really significant relationship, and by that time, my mother had moved to St. Croix, so there was a lot of guilt at leaving those two important relationships. But I did finally realize I needed to do what was right for me, and to
okay.
feel safe and healthy again.
So you left the partner that you had when you were in the island, and your mother passed away.
She passed away some years later.
I s-
Um, yeah, she lived there for about 11 years. And she unfortunately had already been planning to move down when I was raped. So um, that ball was already rolling. And it was, I think, I don't know if I would have left. Again, I had really good friends, and I had a strong partner at the time. And I felt like my support system was there. So I decided to stay. And I don't know if that was the right decision, but it's what happened.
okay.
I
But
think that that can be something that survivors, how they say after a loved one dies or a major life event, not to make any big changes. And that might have been where my wanting to stay there was coming from. I just didn't have the energy, the mental or emotional energy to make a change. I just needed to stay within my present network, even though I would have had lots of support had I moved back to the States.
so when you returned to the States, was that when you found the therapist that was herself a rape victim?
Um, I found so my victims advocate on St. Croix through the St. Croix Women's Foundation was she was a rape survivor,
I
and
see.
My therapist on St. Croix, who is absolutely incredible, also like really, really amazing. Her name was Jackie. She, to my knowledge, was not a survivor, but she was incredibly empathetic, incredibly effective, really probably one of the most important relationships I had in that time period. And that's just, I can't say enough about finding a person to talk to, a port in the storm.
Mhm.
My friends were all like unfailingly supportive, but my partner at the time, he had a lot of anger around the issue, and that didn't really help. So I found a lot more comfort in women, um, and I still do.
So, taking you forward, it was roughly 2 years later that you moved back to the States.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you said it was such a relief to leave that area because the fear was constantly in your face, whenever you went out. So
Yeah.
you mentioned Grendel, your pit bull.
She was a pit bull mix. Yeah.
Nick, what role did Grendel play in your healing?
Well, she was my partner, helped me find her. He was a really big dog person, and that, I loved that about him. She she was fantastic. She really grounded me, especially when I moved, because she got me out of bed in the morning. She kept me on a schedule. She was a little intimidating to people because she was pretty big. So it was hard to find the right care for her when I was at work.
Yes.
So, but she was with me until the day she died, and that was a really hard day. She was so good with my children when they were born. But she had a dog aggression problem. So, and I found that out when I brought her to Nantucket and I took her. There's all sorts of really nice dog parks there. And I brought her to the dog park, and she was about a little more than a year old, and she started to get aggressive towards other dogs. And that became a problem walking her. But I just kept her on the leash,
Yeah.
and she is just so grounding, or was so grounding. And I still feel that way about my animals. And they're a big, that can be a big component to helping survivors, through their journey, is finding that routine and the rhythm and the stability of caring for animals.
Yeah. There's animals have such an amazing ability to be so unconditionally loving
Mhm.
and loyal.
Yeah, I have a horse now, so
Oh, really?
yeah, and that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, t- can you identify how are you different today than you might have been without this experience?
Um, so in so many ways, I'm just trying to decide where to begin. I have a deep yearning to connect with other women who've experienced this, and for reasons I explained earlier, it's just hard. It's a hard thing to sort of reach out in the world and talk about. I feel like I have a great deal of empathy for people who um, experience trauma and have a hard time recovering from that.
Yes.
And I had a lot of things going for me, that some other, that not everybody would have the circumstances. That, it was like being airlifted from a disaster zone to be able to go back to my former job. And that, in many ways saved my life.
Hmm.
Just the being able to change locations. So I feel like I just have so much empathy, um, for people who have these incredible life-changing events and the mistakes they make after that, because there will be mistakes made.
Well, you mentioned a book that was extremely helpful to you. Would you name it for our viewers?
Oh, sure. It's Nancy Venerable. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her middle name correctly. Raine, Raine, and it's called Rape and My Journey Back. And that was it was an amazing book. Really thoughtful and introspective. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. Another way, just going back to how my experience changed me, it made me really want to understand. I remember at the time, and then still understand. And like this is just part of a journalist's curiosity, I guess. Understand what led the people to do what they did to me. There were three men. Two of them raped me, and the other one was robbing um, my small cottage while that was happening. I wanted to understand what leads people to commit those crimes, and I still, that's still part of the journey, is to understand. And it was difficult because they were three young Black men, and on just a regular Tuesday morning, this is what they chose to do. And I don't hold that against them. If anything, I feel kind of empathy for them, and I, in a way, I'd want to connect with them, which is really weird.
Uh-huh.
um, and I know that some people do feel that way. Down the road, they want to connect with the person who harmed them and ask them why.
Yes.
And I don't know that I'll have that opportunity, but that changed me as well. I don't have as much empathy for people who commit crimes like that, but I have I have more than I might have otherwise.
I I am curious, always curious about relationships. That's the passion of my field.
Mhm.
And I share your curiosity. I want to ask what happened to you that turned you into someone that would create that, kind of violence against another human being. Uh, it's a big question, isn't it?
Say that again.
It's a big question to, the curiosity of what happened to those men that would turn them into the kind of human being that would create that kind of violence
Yeah,
against another
yeah,
human.
yeah. There are a lot of factors. I don't know anything about their backgrounds. You can only guess.
Yeah.
Um, you can never make assumptions about someone's background. I heard at one point that it was a gang initiation dare. And it was, I wasn't supposed to be home that morning. Usually there'd been some robberies in the neighborhood, and usually I was at work, but I had an evening assignment, so I was going in later that day. Um, so, um, it's possible that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Well, I'm you mentioned that you're ready to more actively connect with other rape survivors, and
Mhm.
this is a big step for you to,
Yeah.
kind of become public with the article in Authority magazine. We have no idea how many survivors may read your article or watch this video. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for the courage you've shown, not only to pursue your own healing, but to move forward and now perhaps become a victim's advocate.
That's, I'd like to become the type of person who helped me, who turned her, and I wish I could find her, who turned, her tragedy into something. Like she touched my life immensely.
I believe that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending these few minutes with me and bringing your story to the public in a way that I'm sure is going to help others. And
Thank you.
I am so sorry for what you've been through, but I have so much admiration for your courageous journey of healing. I have no doubt that sharing your story will help many, many others.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is